Hey, I've been going over some of that stuff. I want to ask you a couple questions, right?
All right.
I mean, obviously, we're going to speak allegedly, right? They,
Right.
I mean, they allege that this kid gets killed because he's living in a cell with a black dude, right?
That's what they're saying, yeah.
All right, so you tell me allegedly why it happened. If that's not what really happened, you tell me.
It allegedly happened because they put him in the rec cage with me and Blue. We're walking back and forth. He's talking shit. We're talking shit back and forth to each other. And he said, I'm not going to Lewisburg and listen to any gang members. You guys are all pussies. And we said, we're gang members. And he squared up on us, and that was it. We got in a fist fight.
Let me ask you this, did he know that you were an armed dude or no?
Yeah, I mean, I got a tattoo blasted across the back of my head saying arm in big red letters. And Blue's got SAC written on his face.
Yeah, you didn't have, I mean, I'm only asking you because you didn't have that on the back of your head when we were together in Big Sandy, I don't think.
I got it done there by my homie, Tommy Vargas.
Oh, the kid from Boston, Dennis Mooney's co-defendant.
Yeah.
Okay.
On March 11th, 2011, Kenneth Mills did not know that his life would end in a recreation cage at USP Atlanta. Mills had been part of extreme violence when he was dishing it out at USP Lee alongside his cohort, Mark Jordan. In the summer of 2010, Mills was telling other prisoners that he wanted to catch a life sentence in the feds so that he did not have to go to the state of Florida to serve a prison sentence there for murdering Rudy Prado, a murder that he committed less than 2 months after he had been released from serving a 20-year prison sentence. Kenneth Mills was now looking for the perfect victim. Mark Jordan and Mills would strike a friendship and plot on Paul Weekly. Weekly was an admitted killer, but also a snitch. Another prisoner from Pennsylvania would get the local paper outlining Weekly's anticipated cooperation. For federal prisoners on the USP level, snitching is a prison death sentence offense. What did Weekly do? He cooperated with the government and was all lined up to testify, and in time, he would. Weekly would eventually confess to a jury that he had helped a man torture and kill a pharmacist and the pharmacist's girlfriend as part of a plot to rob him of tens of thousands of dollars he made from illegal drug sales. Being that Mark Jordan was from the same place as Weekly, the two men, Mills and Jordan, would begin to plot on taking Weekly's life. And when the time came in 2010, Mills would attack Weekly at USP Lee with Mark Jordan, a convicted prison killer. Jordan had recently been released from the federal ADX Supermax to USP Lee for killing another prisoner, David Stone, on June 3, 1999, at USP Florence. Mills would attack Weekly from behind with a prison shank, and the two would battle. Mills would plunge a prison shank into Weekly's body, but then the unexpected would happen. Weekly would fight back, taking the knife from Mills. The two would fall to the ground as Mark Jordan stepped in to help Mills when their mission seemed to be failing. Prison politics, just a few short years later, would make sure that Mills would be on the receiving end of violence that makes purgatory look like child's play. Extreme violence has always plagued the federal prison system and will always be a part of it. Mills has been no stranger to violence or prison politics. Federal prison is rife with gangs and gang violence. Groups of felons classify themselves as cars. Cars are made up of mostly people from their own geographical area. Gang members are just that. They may be part of ARM, what many classify as a gang, Aryan Resistance Militia, or possibly SAC, Soldiers of Aryan Culture. Some of these white gangs are just that, gangs that are sometimes classified as white nationalist groups espousing white supremacist or white separatist ideologies, often focusing on the alleged inferiority of non-white persons. White prison gang members like Donnie LaFond and Jason Robert Whittison would follow the beliefs and ideology of David Lane with their own twist. David Lane, a member of the group The Order, would become infamous among white prison gangs after penning what many would classify the best-known slogan of the U.S. white supremacist movement, the 14 words. Well, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. Eventually, Lane would die in federal prison while serving his 190-year term. Other groups might be Latin Kings or Bloods. Federal prison is filled with angry, violent men associated with these gangs and different cars. Mills would finally meet his maker at USP Atlanta, but why would he be killed? Donnie LaFond, a prominent armed gang member, and Jason Robert Whittison, a member of SAC, were all housed at USP Atlanta, and in time, the three men would clash in a bout of violence that would leave Mills' blood on the razor wire. On the morning of March 11, 2011, prison cops would be taking prisoners out of their cells and escorting them to recreation cages. The first to walk out that morning would be Donnie LaFawn, the well-respected armed gang member. Next, his cellmate, SAC gang member Jason Robert Whittison. Not long after they entered the recreation cage, Kenneth Mills would be handcuffed behind his back and escorted to recreation as well. He was asked by correctional officer Xavier Johnson if he was good to go into a cage with LaFawn and Whittison. Mills said he was good. When he was put into the cage, little did he know that in a few short moments, he would be battling for his life. According to court records, Mills, a white independent, was living in a cell with a black prisoner. LaFawn and Whittison would warn him that in the feds, there was no race mixing. If you ran with the whites or were in a white car, then what he was doing was a no-no. Just days before, Mills was in the recreation cage next to LaFawn, who would ask him why he was selling up with a black dude, and Mills would respond, that was where the cops had put him, and he did not want to beef with the cops. LaFawn would advise Mills that he should find another cell to live in since he ran with the whites. Mills stated that he had already tried to get moved and the cops would not move him, and then he got angry with the two gang members, telling them what to do and what the rules were for white prisoners like him. Mills, full of prison bravado, would buck that rule and tell the two gang members that he was running his own program and that no one would dictate what he did. Hate between white independent inmates and white gang members had been brewing for many years, and Mills was part of that hate. For many years, white gang members would impose their will on regular white prisoners. They would tell them what to do, not allow them to change the white television, and basically ran the show. This would be the beginning of the white independents. White prisoners that were not gang affiliated would come together to become their own gang or car. And in time, the white independents would have bigger numbers, and with numbers, strength. On that fateful morning when Mills was asked if he was good to go into the cage by the prison guards with the two white gang members despite beefing with them, he knew that prison politics dictated that he not say no. He had no choice but to walk into the rec cage or look like a sucker. After all, he was heading to the SMOO program at Lewisburg for his assault on Weekly. Lewisburg, the SMOO program, was the big leagues for some of the most violent prisoners the federal prison system had to offer. Even among white independents, Mills did not want to look like a punk, so he had to face the two men that were trying to dictate his program. And then he would walk into the cage as LaFawn and Whittison were doing burpees in their prison boxers and blue Jackie Chan shoes. Another prisoner would call LaFawn to the side and ask him if Mills was still living outside his race. LaFawn stated that he believed so. LaFawn and Whittison would stop exercising and start talking to Mills, who, as many prisoners know, had a tough guy bravado about him. Some would say he was arrogant. Again, LaFawn would tell Mills that what he was doing was outside white politics, and that if he was running white, he had to change cells and could not race mix. Mills responded that he was tired of white gang members trying to dictate how he did his time. Mills would tell LaFawn that you gang dudes are pussies, and with those words, LaFawn would punch Mills in the face. Mills would swing back wildly, and then Jason Whittison, also known as Blue, would join in as white gang members are required to do. Prison is prison, and bad things happen sometimes. The battle for life or death would run through Mills' mind. Some prisoners, as crazy as it sounds, wish for death, and some that do change their minds when they are confronted with that reality. Before long, Mills was on the ground. Video would show LaFawn and Whittison punching and kicking Mills into a world of the unknown. Prison guard Xavier Johnson and other cops would hear the commotion and head to the rec cage. There they would find both men stomping on Mills' head and neck. The men were ordered to stop fighting, and they did, but Mills was left bloody and unconscious. Mills would be carted off to medical with head trauma, lacerations, and swelling of his brain. Mills would undergo immediate surgery in an attempt to keep him alive. Doctors would place him in a medically induced coma, and the BOP would send him to a medical prison in Missouri, where he would lay in a prison cell for 5 weeks before he finally closed his eyes. At the direction of Sally Yates, the government would pursue a hate crime charge against LaFawn and Blue, and the only way to paint the prosecution was through other prisoners who wanted a way out. LaFawn and Blue would argue that this was not a racially motivated crime, but instead the response to Mills being mouthy. USP Atlanta has since the beginning been riddled with violence. Construction was completed in January 1902, and the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary opened with the transfer of 6 convicts from the Sing Sing Correctional Facility in upstate New York. They were the beneficiaries of the Three Prisons Act of 1891, which established penitentiaries in Leavenworth, Kansas, Atlanta, Georgia, and McNeil Island, Washington. The first two remain open today. The third closed in 1976. The Atlanta site was the largest federal prison, with a capacity of 3,000 inmates. Inmates' case files presented many biographies of men confined in the penitentiary. Prison officials recorded every detail of their lives, their medical treatments, their visitors, their letters to and from the outside world. A lonely and gloomy place that would perpetuate violence on astronomical scales. In November 1987, Cuban detainees, tired of indefinite confinement and in constant fear of being deported back to Cuba, would riot for 11 days. They staged a bloody riot, seizing dozens of hostages and setting fire to the prison. At least one prisoner was killed. Local hospitals reported admitting a total of 8 Cubans suffering gunshot wounds, along with 2 prison guards who were slightly injured. It was also the place of infamous Aryan Brotherhood member Tommy Silverstein, the place where he would escape his solitary confinement cell, only to be taken back and handed off to guards by a gang of other prisoners. Silverstein was not the only infamous prisoner to ever be confined here. There were others, like the Irish mob boss Whitey Bulger, who entered USP Atlanta in 1956 and would later be killed at USP Hazleton while sitting in his wheelchair on October 30th, 2018. Other mobsters would also be killed at USP Atlanta, like Vincent Papa, the mob associate of the Lucchese crime family, convicted in 1975 of masterminding the theft of heroin seized during the French Connection investigation from the New York City Police Department Property Office from 69 to 72. Al Capone and Little Nicky Scarfo would also call this dirty dungeon in the inner city of Atlanta home. USP Atlanta was home to many white supremacists and not a stranger to the violence that would wreak on the whole federal system. In one attack at Atlanta, the Aryan Brotherhood attempted to decapitate another prisoner. Just killing him was not enough. The leader, Barry Mills, would be charged with the murder of John Sherman Marzaloff on May 20th, 1979. He was killed in the men's room of the recreation shack at the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. His death was caused by 16 stab wounds in the head, back, shoulder, and upper arm area. The murder weapon was tossed into the commode, and a second similar knife, unused in the killing, was tucked up under the arm of the victim. Although numerous witnesses testified to having seen Mills in the recreation shack area at the time of the killing, the only eyewitness was Danny Holliday. Holliday, the prosecution's key witness, testified that he accompanied Mills to the recreation shack armed with the second knife, for the sole purpose of robbing Marzaloff, that he had been surprised by the murder and taken no part in it. The prosecution's theory of the case was that the murder of Marzaloff had been committed pursuant to an Aryan Brotherhood contract. During that trial, the prosecution offered extensive testimony that in a drug transaction, Marzaloff had cheated Tommy Silverstein, an Aryan Brotherhood commissioner in another penitentiary. That Tommy Silverstein had put out a contract on Marzaloff, and that this contract had been communicated to Mills, also an Aryan Brotherhood commissioner, by a letter channeled through someone on the streets. In the end, Mills would be convicted of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. But what would become of LaFawn and Whittison, Donnie, an active Aryan resistance militia member, and Jason Whittison, a soldier of Aryan culture? They would find themselves in the same courtroom that Barry Mills was once in, fighting for their own lives. If convicted of killing Mills in what prosecutors would characterize as a hate crime, both men could possibly spend the rest of their lives in prison. Soldiers of Aryan culture have made their mark on the federal prison system and are known for violence. Some would say that in the federal system, they're at the top of the pecking order when it comes to white gangs. SAC, sometimes referred to as soldiers of Aryan culture and soldiers of an Aryan culture, is a large American white supremacist prison gang, according to court papers. American prisoner Tracy David Tinman Sweeney founded the Soldiers of Aryan Culture in 1997. According to Tracy Sweeney's brother Steve, Tracy had been influenced to establish a white power group after an Aryan Brotherhood affiliate introduced him to white supremacist literature sometime in the mid to late 1990s. Prior to that, Steve Sweeney alleges that his brother was a non-racist who was once a part of a multiracial street gang and an avid fan of hip-hop music. Tinman, as he is known, was and is a person that many men respected, and others would fear him. SAC has grown since its initial founding, making its way across the United States. SAC operates both inside and outside prison walls and are classified as a security threat group. SAC officers outside of prison stay in contact with those inside correctional facilities and communicate orders by phone. The gang is organized by a paramilitary ranking structure consisting of generals, captains, lieutenants, sergeants, and soldiers. The more criminal activity that a member engages in, the more likely they'll advance to a higher rank, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. SAC members rose through the ranks by committing violence against Hispanic and black inmates chosen at random. SAC accepts new members by an invitation only from a lieutenant or a sergeant. Prospective members are required to complete a 6 to 12-month period of missions. These orders typically call for attacks on other prisoners. Once the mission is complete and the member is approved, they receive a patch, a tattoo of the group's insignia, a swastika interwoven with an iron cross, sometimes accompanied by the initials S.A.C. There also exist special patches for certain deeds, such as the SS bolts. Some of their members have been sentenced to death for murders committed while inside federal prisons. While being escorted by prison guards at USP Beaumont in 2007, SAC member Mike Isaac Snar, and Agar Garcia were able to free themselves from their restraints and subsequently stab the prison guards, escorting them with makeshift knives. Using the keys they took off the guards, the two then unlocked the cell door of an inmate, Gabriel Rome, and proceeded to stab him a total of 50 times. In the process, Snar and Garcia were quickly detained by prison personnel wielding chemical agents. While the two guards survived the attack, Rome would not. Investigators believe that Rome was murdered because of his apparent escalating bizarre and violent behavior. Attorneys for Snar and Garcia claim that he had repeatedly threatened to kill their clients. Rome had been serving a life sentence for a 1997 armed robbery in Washington, D.C. Snar and Garcia were indicted in 2009 and charged with first-degree murder. In 2010, both assailants were sentenced to death as punishment for the incident. As of now, they are both on death row at USP Terre Haute, awaiting execution. On March 3, 2016, SAC members Christopher Kramer and Ricky Fackrell fatally stabbed inmate Leo Johns at USP Beaumont. Johns, who was also a member of SAC, had allegedly made a remark that had offended a fellow member of the gang, which is thought to be why the attack took place. According to court documents, the killing had been planned for a total of 3 months in advance. Kramer and Fackrell were convicted of first-degree murder and subsequently sentenced to death by a federal jury in Beaumont. Both are currently awaiting their execution as well at the infamous USP Terre Haute. Former gang members, along with other prisoners seeking reductions in their own sentence, would go with the narrative that Mills was killed for living in a cell with a black prisoner in the shoe. It was a narrative that was being painted and accepted by prosecutors. Chad Posey, a dropout SAC gang member, would tell the government that both LaFawn and Whittison told him that they stopped Mills into a coma because he refused to comply with their demands to change his prison cell. The prosecution would tell the jury that Mills was no angel and in fact was a killer himself, but that he did not deserve to die for living in a cell with a black prisoner. For their part, LaFawn and Whittison would argue that Mills had a knife and that they had no choice but to get him before Mills got them, but no knife was found. In the end, LaFawn and Blue would be found guilty. Judge William Duffy, considering Blue's young age when he walked into the federal prison system, would refrain from putting Whittison's lights out with a life sentence. Instead, he would impose a 31-year sentence on Whittison. With good time, Whittison will walk out of prison at the age of 70 years old on September 4th, 2049. Donnie would not be so lucky. Judge Duffy would bury Donnie LaFawn alive with a life sentence. In the end, did they really kill Mills for selling with a black dude? Or was it because of his mouth?
Imagine serving many, many years of your 25-year sentence for bank robbery, and then you kill someone in prison, and you end up with a life sentence. That's Donnie's story. Donnie wants to get out of prison. You know, this narrative that the government painted in this case was that they killed Mills because he was living with a black dude. Do you think the government really cared about Mills? Fuck no, they don't care about Mills. He's just another dude that killed some people and ended up in federal prison later on for doing some robberies. But if you know prison politics and you know white politics, then you can probably think, oh, you know what? They did kill him because he was living in that cell. That's not the real reason that he was killed. He wasn't killed based on the fact that he was living with a black dude. That's how the problem started. That, was the narrative from the white gang members, like, yo, bro, what are you doing? You ain't supposed to be in that cell, homeboy. A lot of times now, white gang members don't try to dictate independent business. They don't. They don't like independents, and independents claim that they don't like white gang members. But they don't really try to dictate your program. Mills was on his way to the SMOO program. I believe it was for, the stabbing with Weekly over at USP Lee. And I was in prison with Mills. I know him personally. I was around him every day, him and Mark Jordan hanging out. His mission was, hey man, I'm gonna kill a dude in prison so I don't have to go back to that state system. I'd rather spend the rest of my life here in the feds because the living conditions are a little bit better, or so he thought. But the real reason that he gets killed in federal prison is because Donnie and Blue kind of like, yo, what's up, bro? And, I know how Donnie was. He's from Boston. He was a joker. He was a serious dude. But he would clown people, man. And that's what he was probably doing to do, like clowning them, but in a serious way. Like, yo, bro, you know what it is, man. You're on your way to the SMOO program. When the white dudes know or find out that you're living with a black dude, it's going to be an issue when you get over there. And you got true killers in there. You got guys that are serving life. And obviously, Donnie becomes a killer, right? But I don't believe that he killed him because he was race mixing or because he was living in a cell with a black dude. I mean, dudes are against that. They'll usually just beat the shit out of you, right? I mean, this is prison politics. And don't think for a minute that a lot of black dudes don't want white dudes living with you. And when a white dude's living with a black dude in a prison cell, let's just call it what it is. Dudes that been to prison, you can chime in. They're like, yo, man, dudes in their cell fucking that dude, man. That's what they think. Well, that's the narrative that they paint in prison. But really, they try to dictate his program to a certain degree. Like, yo, bro, you ain't supposed to be doing that. And then he does get a little bit mouthy and they talk shit. And I know how Mills was. I know him personally. I know he thought he was tough. He hated white gang members, or at least, that was the narrative that he pushed out there. And then he goes into cell. Why does he go into cell? I said this plenty of times. I'm not going to be that dude where you're like, yo, man, Chad was doing good. He was fighting them dudes and he was winning until they stabbed him in the neck and they killed him. But Mills wouldn't let his pride. It was his pride. He wouldn't let his pride go, right? Yeah, I'm going in that cage with them dudes. And he went in there. He went into a danger zone. And then you see the statements at the end. Of course, people sign up, man. Dudes with life sentences, dudes with 30, 40 years, former gang members. I got a whole bunch of this stuff. We're gonna do some Patreon stuff with some vicious pictures. It's coming soon, I promise. These dudes, they want out of prison. People are looking for opportunities. And they start painting that narrative. White supremacist dudes, man, they killed dude because he was living with a black dude. The government comes down and they kind of put it out. Yeah, man, U.S. Attorney's Office down here giving out deals. They believe them dudes killed that dude because he was living with a black dude. That's a narrative that some of the cops will paint. Then, of course, the word gets around. And dudes start writing letters, right? Like, yo, I'm trying to get out of here, man. Like, yo, what's up? I seen everything. They might not even been at rec that day. But they're going to give it a shot. And now Donnie's sentenced to life in prison, where he will likely die. He will likely die in prison. There were 4 different shots wrote in this case. What is a shot? When a cop writes you up for doing something wrong. They wrote 4 different ones. And Donnie only ended up with 1. And there were different narratives in each of those shots, right? He's tried to get those documents through FOIA in all kinds of ways. Can't get them. But this was also the narrative that the U.S. Attorney's Office was painting down there in Georgia also. Sally Yates, she was trying to get to that White House, that Attorney General's office. And they prosecuted this case as pretty much a hate crime. If Donnie would have been convicted of manslaughter, he wouldn't have been subject to a life sentence. But he's subject to a life sentence. And now, like I said, he will likely die in prison. Blue came to prison a young man, going hard for his gang, for the people that he signed up with, going hard. And now, and if your son's watching, he should listen to this. He went to prison as a young man, very young, in his 20s. And now, his early 20s. And now he's going to get out of prison when he's 70 years old. What is he going to do with his life? You go into prison in your early 20s and you get out when you're 70? What is he going to do? If he ever makes it out. Blood on the Razor Wire TV, I hope you like what we did with this. With respect, until tomorrow, we're out.